Hospice chaplains, especially hospice chaplains, would not use this language. Can you imagine somebody coming and saying, "I just prayed with your mother. She's as good as dead"? For heaven's sakes. But the writer of Hebrews is using this to make a point. God had made a covenant with Abraham that Abraham would be the father of a great nation and his descendants would be as numerous as the stars in the heavens or the grains of sand on the seashore. The only problem was Abraham and Sarah didn't have any descendants. Abraham considered adopting one of his slaves to be his son and his heir. And God said, "No, this will be a child of yours." So Sarah gave her Egyptian handmaiden, Hagar, to sleep with Abraham so that he could have a son. And he did. That son's name was Ishmael. And then later, Sarah became so jealous of Ishmael and his mother, Hagar, that she sent them out in the desert to die. So she thought. So when Abraham was 100 years old, with no heir to carry on his name and no prospect of fathering more children, given that he and Sarah had been trying for at least 75 years, he was as good as dead. God could have, of course, chosen a young and vigorous man to be the father of a nation. Or God could have started that nation with Abraham 75 years before, when Abraham was 25 and Sarah was 15. But God didn't do that. God waited until Abraham was as good as dead, and Sarah was pretty darn skeptical, because Abraham trusted in God's promises. Promises which Abraham would not see completed in his lifetime. And although Abraham was as good as dead at 100 years old, after Sarah died, Abraham remarried a woman named Keturah. Now, I don't know what Keturah was expecting. I hope she didn't marry Abraham just to get his tents and his livestock, because he fathered 6 more children with Keturah and died at the age of 175 years old. Now, I'm not arguing that everything that is alive should stay alive. There may be practices and programs which have run their course and need to end. There are attitudes and ideologies of discrimination and hatred which we might have thought were as good as dead, but have come to life in ugly and violent ways. These hateful ideologies should die, instead of people dying because of them. But programs, maybe they were good in the 1960s, and attitudes of hatred are not covenants with God. They are our best and sometimes our worst efforts to make the world the way that we think it ought to be, to make our own vision a reality. But the witness of Hebrews 11, using the example of the Old Testament, is that we covenant with God so that our vision is not our own. We are called to have faith in things that we cannot see and which we could not accomplish through our own efforts. Our vision, which is from God, can only be completed through Jesus Christ, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. We're on a journey to our homeland, and that home is a place that we've never seen. If we're lucky, if we were raised in love and community, we may have caught glimpses of that home. But our heavenly home is not a place we go back to. It's a place that we are journeying toward. Now, the title of this sermon is Homeward Bound. I don't know about you, but for me, that phrase is not just a nice title. It's the name of a book called Homeward Bound, The Incredible Journey, and that book was made into a movie in 1963 and then remade in 1993. Are any of the rest of you familiar with that movie? This movie was a big deal for my family. It's the story of 3 pets, 2 dogs and a cat. They are left with a friend while the 3 children who are their owners are being relocated to a new home. The pets think that they have been abandoned, so they escape from the person who is caring for them and go on this journey through the perils of the wilderness to find their owners again. It's a great story, and it has this great musical theme. It ends on Thanksgiving Day, and a couple years ago when all of our kids were home for Thanksgiving, we started talking about that movie and pulled up the end on YouTube, and we were all in tears like in 5 minutes. So I was hoping to show you a clip of the movie today. I can't because of copyright things, but I can explain it to you a little bit and see if you hear how this is an analogy for our Hebrews text. The 3 children who are devastated by the loss of their pets have heard that they're in the area. The pets have been spotted in the area where they live, but they've looked, they've had rangers out looking, they can't find them. This newly blended family is gathered together for Thanksgiving, and they're all outside looking out at the woods, sadly, and all of a sudden they hear a bark, and Chance, the bulldog who belongs to the youngest son, comes bounding over the hill, and there's this joyful reunion, and a couple minutes later there's a meow, and the cat comes running up, and the little girl is so happy to have the cats, and they're so glad to have their pets back. And then everybody realizes that the oldest son, Peter, that his dog has not returned. And Peter looks over the hill and says, he was too old. It was just too far. He was just too old. And he turns around to walk back into the house. Now, I reenacted this scene with my daughter Becca when she was a toddler many times. And it would go something like this. She would say, he was too old. It was just too far. And in the movie, this is where the French horn would come in with the solo theme. She'd wait a couple beats and say, Mom, bark, bark. And then I have to go, ruh, ruh. And she would run and give me a big hug and say, oh, Shadow, you came back. I missed you so much. The whole movie is based on the premise that they thought Shadow was as good as dead. This wise old dog who had guided them all home was as good as dead. And then he appeared in this joyful reunion. You can see why this movie makes me a little emotional. So listen to what Hebrews 13:16 says. All these, that is, all of these descendants of Abraham, died in faith without having received the promises, but from a distance they saw and greeted them. They confessed that they were strangers and foreigners on the earth, for people who speak in this way make it clear that they are seeking a homeland. If they'd been thinking of a land they left behind, they would have had opportunity to return. But as it is, they desire a better country, that is, a heavenly one. And that, sisters and brothers, is what we are bound for. No one who is on earth now has been there before. But the fathers and mothers of our faith, the prophets, the writers of the Old Testament, laid the foundation for that homeland with their faithful action. And if we look toward Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith, he will guide us home. Even in situations where it seems like hope is as good as dead, faith can take us beyond what we can see to the conviction of what we cannot see. As the message says, trust in God as the firm foundation under everything, which makes life worth living. May we walk in faith. Amen.